You are listening to Bridging the Gap, the podcast where we talk about businesses going global with the help of localization.
Stay tuned to meet the marketing, product, and software experts that make brands international and learn strategies to speak your customers' language.
Hey Honza, how are you doing?
Hey, Marta. I'm good. How are you?
Oh, I'm feeling so tired today. Like when you have a bad night's sleep, it's just so horrible to go ahead and work. And I find like when I'm working alone, since I work remotely, it's kind of more difficult when I need the social interaction, you know? If I had like a rough night and I need to just vent, it's not the same doing it in person as doing it like via Slack, I guess.
Absolutely. Like working from home, it requires some discipline. And yeah, you need to have the like a good team around that supports you.
Yeah, I don't feel alone. Like some people think that you're just on your own the whole day. Like I'm in contact with you guys at all times, but sometimes I feel like a physical meeting would be more productive in certain days, you know, because there's varying energy levels and, you know, concentration levels, and that could actually help some days. But at the end of the day, as you say, like it's super important to have like some kind of personal discipline, some kind of structure. And I recognize that not everybody can do that. When I talk to other people who don't work remotely, they usually mention that I wouldn't be able to do it.
Yeah.
So it's something related to yourself, to your own motivation, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. Like when you're in a room with a few people, it forces you to perform, basically, if I put it that way.
Social pressure.
Yeah. But on the other hand, I like the flexibility of things. I can arrange my day not based on time schedule, but on my energy levels, and that's
Yeah.
also
That was my personal motivation as well. Like when I used to work in offices, there weren't like normal offices because I'm a journalist, so I worked in newsrooms. And I spent 10, 12 hours in the newsroom, and that was madness. Like I needed some break, I needed some personal space, I needed to organize myself. And when you're working on like breaking news, there's no way you can just choose. Like the news choose you. You cannot do anything about it. Definitely the flexibility is very good and the freedom to just organize yourself, but you have to do it. Some people just prefer to have a schedule, like I said, schedule. I feel like it depends on the industry as well. Like for journalism, as I said, it's like normally, unless you're freelance and you're just working on your own topics, normally it's a requisite, you know, but with translation, for example, when I've also been a translator, and now in the localization industry, I see that this is just norm. Everyone works at their own pace. People are very independent, flexible, and they just put their seats in every project independently. So I feel like at some point, if you work with translation or localization some capacity, remote work is going to happen.
yeah, absolutely. Like as I say, localization forces remote by default because you want to have people in the locations, like in the specific locations, in order
Right.
to really understand the culture and what's happening. So if you want to localize, prepare to get remote. Even if you're not right now, you would have to at some point.
Yeah, that is hard, especially for like traditional enterprises or companies that usually work in the traditional schedule or the presential, I don't know, physical schedule, you know. At some point, if they want to just expand to another market, they are going to have to start having a relationship with people who work remotely or independently, and they're going to have to just shift their mindset in a sense. I don't know if that's possible. I guess it's quite difficult for a company where that's not the norm.
It's absolutely a big change in the ways of working, how you approach things, and as you said, like also in the mindset. So you need to adjust a bit on a different type of work. It's definitely a challenge, and that's why I think today's podcast topic will be interesting for everyone. We have two really fabulous guests, and we're going to talk about remote work and how to overcome the challenges. So looking forward.
Yeah, today we have with us Caitlin Rozario. She's a productivity consultant, sustainable productivity, which is important in this era. And we have Anton Iokov from Fibery. So hello, Anton. How are you doing?
Hi there, doing good, thank you.
We're already recording, if you don't mind.
Wow, sure. That was fast. Okay.
We are waiting for Caitlin. How are you doing, Anton? Can you introduce yourself for everyone?
Sure, doing good. My name is Anton, and I lead growth at Fibery.
Okay. What about Fibery? Like, it's a very young company. Localazy loves Fibery. We use it internally, but maybe some of the audience doesn't really know about Fibery. What kind of tool is it?
Sure. So Fibery is meant to be an operating system for your business, a place where you collaborate on your objectives, on your tasks, on your documents, all sorts of things. And it's a no-code platform at the core. So rather than providing the way that you should work, we allow you to build your own tools in Fibery. And yeah, that was, I mean, I know that obviously Localazy is our customer, but when you shared a document to prepare for this podcast and it was a Fibery link, I was happy to see that. Yeah. Hey, Caitlin.
Yeah, we enjoy it a lot.
Hey,
Hello, Caitlin.
Hey, nice
Happy
to
to
see
have
you
you.
all. It's great to be here. I'm excited.
So we are already live, Caitlin. Can you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Caitlin Rozario. I'm founder of Interlude. I help teams and ambitious people to find more sustainable productivity through workshops and events and things. I'm also head of brand and culture at a tech startup here in London called Metricus.
Fantastic. So we already started like making the introductions, and we wanted to start off with like the basics of remote work. Honza and I were talking about how remote work is like becoming a necessity in some industries, especially translation and localization. We feel that is the case normally because you need people in the different locations. And when you have to deal with that, when you have to become remote or incorporate remote in your company, or even if you're remote from the start, what are the absolute basics you should have in your arsenal, like no negotiables that are important to like make it work?
I'm going to sound quite boring through this podcast, perhaps, because I think it all comes back to culture. I really think that is the most important thing. So why I say that is because if people think about culture, I think a lot of the time they think about the quote unquote fun stuff, right? But that's not only what culture is. That is part of it, but it's not only it. One of the most important things about culture is your norms, expectations, boundaries. And I think when it comes to remote work, there have to be really, really clear goals so that everyone knows what they're working towards, really clear boundaries around when people are and aren't expected to work, particularly if you're working across time zones. And I also think that this is where personal development and well-being come into it as well, right? So I think that there's a lot of different elements and there has to be clear structure around all of that. I think where things get really confusing is where there's clear boundaries for some teams and not for others, and no one really knows what everyone is doing. So it doesn't have to be really complicated, but if everyone knows this is how we work as a basis, that to me is the most important thing, and that is culture.
Yeah, absolutely agree. What is your stance, Anton? What do you think about this?
So yeah, in my view, compared to the collocated setup, the most important part probably is internal motivation, because there is no social aspect, no expectation that you will work and work productively. So you'll need to find a good reason to go into your home office or open your laptop at the coffee house and not do something else. And I don't think external motivation works for remote long term. So that's one part. The second part is maybe a more practical thing, that there is more emphasis on being proactive, because it's harder to notice people that need help, that are stuck. So you'll need to be proactive in reaching out for help. And at the same time, radiate more, right? There is no informal communication flow. So this is how you tell people what you do right now and whether you need help. Don't expect them to pull this information out of you. I think these are two probably most important things in my view.
Can I just jump in there? Because I think something that's interesting that from that is I agree with you on the proactivity, but I also think that management is really important there with things like one-to-ones. So there should be situations where someone will not pull it out of you, but there's the opportunity for you to be proactive, if that makes sense. Like, you don't have to go and find your manager because you know every week you have 25 minutes to catch up with them. So I think it is that balance of being proactive, but within quite simple structures.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a nice safety net for sure.
Yes, safety nets, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. I was wondering, guys, if you can list like the biggest misconceptions people have about remote work, because, well, in Localazy we also have remote work and Fibery works like that. So I'm sure you have heard many comments from peers, family, friends about remote work, and of course Caitlin works with remote companies as well. So I just want to hear what's the temperature in society right now about what remote work is.
Kathleen, would you like to go
I'm
first?
happy to. Yeah, I think that there is still a misconception that if you're at home, you're not busy. Like, I actually think so often people who, and there's data on this actually from Forbes. It's actually only a small percentage, but there's a misconception that you're not doing stuff, but actually there's a small percentage increase in working from home and working longer hours. Like, actually, when you're someone who does do this a lot, you do. I'll just finish this off. I'll just drift back to my laptop. I'll just come back to it. So I think that misconception does also come from people who have either never worked from home or they're in an industry where it's not normal or expected. But that does still comprise a lot of people. And I think that, kind of coming back to what we were just talking about, I think that within teams where we do a lot of remote work, there is a misconception that the culture will just build itself and it will just take care of itself. But actually, we need to be intentional. And as you said, Anton, like making those safety nets, I think is really important.
Yeah, it's hard for me to say about misconceptions because I realized when thinking about this topic beforehand that the vast majority of my friends and obviously colleagues and even our customers are working remotely. So there is not many people left that stick with the office work for 5 days a week. So people, I think starting from 2020, have gotten quite used to remote work. And there are no misconceptions that just jump at me.
Personally, I think there's a generational breach still here, because I hear like older people usually tell me, how do you organize? How are you productive? How can you manage communication with your colleagues? And I have other younger friends who work remote and they understand it well. I think it's something that it's gonna permeate in society with the passing of years, but for older people, it's like something that blows their mind, because it comes down not to someone just looking over you to see what you're doing, but you yourself taking charge of your work. And that is like a huge shift, a cultural shift, in my opinion.
I agree. Yes, you treat people as adults that have internal motivation. Like it was previously a nice thing to do, but with remote, it becomes just crucial. Yeah. I think we'll get there.
So we were talking about, Excuse me, Anton, I stepped on that. So I was wondering, like, we were talking about how management affects remote work, but at the same time, how does the team structure affect collaboration between the team? Because it's super important to have like a structure that works in the remote setting.
Yeah, true. And we try to work in smaller teams of 3-4 people. Communication is much easier this way. And there are a few points where we share information for the whole company. At the same time, we have like Fibery workspace and obviously Slack workspace that are both transparent. And there's so many things in the written form now. So if you're curious about what other team is doing, not just your 3-person team, there is always a way to peek into a comment, ask questions. So small teams and transparency within the company, I think this is what helps in our case.
Yeah, so you basically suggest that you create the transparency by documenting things, right?
Yes. So, like, for example, we have monthly reports, 3 documents each month. One is for our VC investors, and that we also share with the team, with the entire team. So with financials, with MRR, with key metrics, and also key initiatives. And we also have internal ones for product and for growth. And the product one we share almost as is publicly as well for our customers and partners. And yeah, monthly cadence we figured out it's good enough for most large initiatives to keep the team informed and motivated and allow people a chance to join some areas that pop up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know, Caitlin, if you agree with this approach.
Completely. I actually don't really have anything to add because I think that's exactly what I would say as well. Documentation, transparency. I think when you are working remotely and, like you said, you don't have those informal opportunities to just bump into people, everything just needs to be really clear and clean. And I like how you said, Anton, like peek into it. Like I think that's it. Like it doesn't mean that everyone needs to be on top of each other, but it's just like, because you don't get to sit across the room from someone and say, you know, that thing that you were working on, this way you can just have a quick look, and it reduces that friction, especially again, if you're in different time zones, of having to message someone and say, where were you up to on this in relation to my work? You can just have a quick look. So yeah, decent task management, documentation, transparency, I think that's just really fundamental.
Yeah, that sounds reasonable. What about you mentioned structure? I think this is a really important part of the structure, documenting things and being transparent. But what about the time structure, like the rituals and the things you do regularly? Do you have some tips regarding that? What do you think is the key to succeed in this area?
So I would say here, this is where we come back to, and I told you I was going to be boring about culture here, but there's a few different things that come together here. So you've got company culture, right? So that's the things that you have kind of set at the top. This is how we work. And if you're really clear with that, it means that incoming people can't complain about it because from the beginning you said, this is what we do, this is how we work. Within that, and particularly I think in tech teams and remote teams, there's microcultures, and your microculture should, if it's healthy, reflect the overall culture, but then have its own kind of spin on it and its own version. And something we've done in my team that worked really well, and I do with a lot of teams that I work with, is this, and you can make this as kind of deep or as top line as is appropriate to you, but we did an exercise called like the user manual, and you kind of ask the team different questions about how they like to work, what would their preferences be, and when they are the most productive for different things. So for example, collaboration, deep work, creativity, these different sorts of things. And what we found in my team is everyone was aligned. We all had the same things. Everyone prefers to do deep creative work in the mornings, and everyone prefers to do collaboration in the afternoons. So from that, we were able to say, okay, well then when we have our big collaborative sessions, we will always do them in the afternoons. Where there then needs to be, okay, it doesn't mean that you necessarily just do everything that the team says. It depends on your company and the different ways you work, to which degree you take that in. For example, we still, despite the fact that we know that people do their best deep work in the mornings, we still do our Monday morning stand-up first thing, because it does just work better to know what everyone's up to at the beginning of the week. So that does contradict things a little bit, but for the sake of the way we need to do things, it works. So you see how there's a little bit of give and take. So I think that's really important. I like to talk a lot about good enough systems, like what's the most basic version that does the job. And I think that works with things like meetings, one-to-ones, stand-ups. What is the most basic, shortest, quickest, least frequent version of all of those things that gets the job done, and what works for your team? So I can't sit here and say you should have one stand-up, one clear the deck session, and a weekly one-to-one, because that might not be what works for your team, but you should think about what that cadence is for you. That was a lot of words in one go.
Yeah, I remembered one part, and that really resonates with me, is that you basically let the team help you to create the rituals with you.
Yes.
It's basically the IKEA effect, right? You help them build a thing, and then it's not just an empty rituals imposed on you by default, but you help to create the whole culture, and by default people are more engaged because, you know, when they co-create.
Yeah, I like how you did it, because we just assumed that, okay, we will block early mornings, there will be no meetings, so that makers can make. You know, there is a famous Paul Graham's essay on maker schedule versus manager schedule. And in our team, there are no pure managers. There is no person whose single job responsibility is to manage people. So we have to adjust our schedules accordingly. And yes, all of our meetings, with few exceptions, fit between 11 and 5 o'clock Central Eastern Time. And then it's up to each person basically how they set up their own schedule, how they manage distracting notifications as well, what is their respected response time. And we've eliminated all status meetings from our company gradually, iteratively. So right now, daily, we post what we have done today and what we're planning to do tomorrow in a written form in Fibery, because everyone's schedule is different. Someone, for example, likes to reflect on their work in the evenings. I do. Some people write in the mornings, but the important part is that everyone radiates this information and allows for course corrections and for noticing people that are stuck, noticing some opportunities to share knowledge. So daily written form work well, I think, better than daily stand-ups that we used to have back in the day. The problem is that not every person writes daily all the time. There are people who are consistent about it. There are people that have a hard time to get into the rhythm and get to write dailies at least 3 times a week. We have a constant struggle here, I would admit, to have at least 20 daily messages out of 29 people every day. We haven't found a solution yet. We're just using social pressure right now.
We used to have that problem, right, Honza? This is something that happened to us.
Yeah, we found an interesting fact, because different people in the company, like, they work in a different frequencies. There are people who have like something to say every day, and there are people who are working on hard problems, and they would write like the same things like every day, and they like feel embarrassed to do so.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're trying to normalize this as well. That's fine. If you have a long problem that doesn't make sense breaking down for people, just say, yes, I worked on this today and I plan to do this tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. And there are some daily messages that this week I'm going to work on this tough problem.
Saying that we need to normalize this, I couldn't agree more. I think we've come into this kind of period where if you are not constantly producing, you are not productive, and that just is not, it's just not true. There was this horrible New York Times article. They did a great job, but the content was awful, about productivity monitoring, and there was a finance executive who wasn't getting paid her full amount because she's paid by the hour, because she was spending a lot of time reading and doing maths by hand, and it wasn't registering on the computer. So like, well, you weren't productive. And she was like, I'm a mathematician, I think. Like, I do a lot of thinking. And I think that saying about hard problems, like, what it comes back to is trust and respect. Because just because some person might be in a role that does have a lot of production, like content, for example, like, you know, in the content team, you might be putting out a lot of blog posts and it might have a lot of visible output, but that doesn't mean that other people work in the same way, and it's having respect amongst the team and understanding that just because someone else hasn't got output every day doesn't mean that they're slacking. But then at the same time, it goes back to what Anton said about proactivity and making sure that built into that trust is still keeping an eye on, is that person struggling or are they just working on something? And then that goes back to having clear goals, and it ladders back to those expectations. So I completely agree. Hard problems take time. Not everything can just be ticked off in a day.
Yeah, and I second the sentiment about trust. And I'm very, very skeptical about any productivity metric for knowledge workers. We have thought pretty hard about it because we're in the productivity market. Like, ideally, adopting Fibery should increase your overall productivity. But how do you measure that? And we used to have some of our direct competitors say something like your productivity increases by 30% or you save 1 day a week. And we always agree that that's not the way to go. Like, this is bullshit. And we have tried hard to find some proxy metrics, even if not final metrics, on how to measure knowledge workers' productivity. And, I don't have any solutions at this point. Maybe we will figure something out, but at this time, I think trust is the only way to go.
Anton, I couldn't agree more. I've had exactly the same journey, because before Interlude was consultancy and workshops, it was also an app. And I felt so uncomfortable with all of these like fake metrics, and how have you come to that? And even approximating felt really uncomfortable. And I think what it comes down to is productivity comes from an old system of inputs and outputs that just doesn't exist in knowledge work. It's just not the same. It's amorphous compared to someone working in a factory. You are meant to make 5 bikes in an hour. If you haven't made 5 bikes in an hour, you're not reaching the productivity targets that you're meant to. It's not the same in knowledge work. And it's so heartening to hear that you're the same, where you just can't find a metric that is actually appropriate, because I don't think you can measure productivity in knowledge work in those ways anymore. So I'm glad we're in the same boat.
Yeah, I like to think about productivity more like an environment first, like setting up the right environment for people to do a good job. And instead of measuring productivity, I like to think about measuring the actual outcomes, like what the people should do and what should be the effect of their work, which are much easier to measure in practice.
Yeah, we're on the same page here.
Yeah, so that's what the people should be held accountable for, the objectives, and not the actual amount of work produced.
I would add there, so what my kind of work is around sustainable productivity. So I would 100% agree with that. And I would layer on that this is going back to what we said at the beginning about the proactivity and keeping an eye on people. The sustainable part for me comes into looking at how has that person got to that outcome? Are they completely burnt out at the end of it? If so, great, they've done the job, but that is not sustainable for either the person or the company. And so something will have to change in how they get to those results in the future, because it's not just terrible for the person, and this is people's lives that we're talking about here. It's also not good for the bottom line to have people having to run themselves into the ground to get to an outcome. So I think it's really important to layer those two things on together.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think it's important to spot these signs early before they actually happen. Do you have any tips what to look for, or how do you approach that? Spotting burnout.
Yeah,
Literally.
So this is really, really interesting. In preparation for this, I spent a lot of time on Reddit, because I think people are very honest on Reddit. And what's really fascinating is there are some, and I think this does often fall along kind of team lines because of the natural personality differences between certain teams. And I think there are some people who are very happy to be quite open about how they're feeling and how their work is going and things like that. And then there are other people who are just more reticent, introverted, things like that. And it is going to be much more difficult to notice. So I think it starts with speaking to your team about what sort of baseline measurement they would be comfortable with. Like for your team, is it a pulse survey? Is it in your one-to-one check-ins being like, I am going to ask you this? In my one-to-ones, we do, because we just find it quite funny, we do like, what emoji are you? And it's just quite funny. We have them in a row so we can look back over the weeks and be like, if there's two sad faces in a row, we're not happy with that. But that's what works for me and my team, and it might not work for you and yours. But I think it's about finding that baseline that someone is comfortable with sharing, because that's what then you can measure against for them. Obviously, this then comes into question with scaling, like how can you do that with a bigger group? But I think that's why it's important to build these norms when you are a small team so that you can figure out how you want to scale them as you get bigger. Sorry, a lot of my answers will be it is down to your team, but I think that is the truth. It's not easy. You do have to figure things out. Like you're saying, Anton, a lot of iteration, a lot of trial and error. And the other thing is that it was funny what you said there, Anton, about the solution, and you haven't quite figured it out yet. There's a book that I've got on my desk by Bruce Mal, who's a designer, and he says that we need to remember that every solution comes with more problems, and that's completely normal and completely fine.
Yep. Yeah. So going back to how to notice burnout earlier, there are two symptoms I would say that we have noticed in our team. One is banal. It's people getting irritable in Slack threads on meetings, getting more skeptical. This is usually a sign that someone needs to chill out for some time. And typically people notice themselves. You don't need to tell someone. Sometimes you need to, right? Like, hey, Alex, you sound pretty irritable and not very optimistic recently. What's up? And then a conversation happens. Another sign is the number of days off left. So we have 21 days off every year. And at some point we decided that they can accumulate over the years. At our previous company, it wasn't the case. But here we decided, okay, we're a startup. It's okay to have these work spurts that someone works for a year and a half really hard, and then they can get more rest. But if we notice that the number is in like 40s or 50s of vacation days available, well, that's a sign that maybe someone needs to go for a vacation. Rarely our CEO almost forces people to take vacation. Like you typically trust people to do it themselves, but sometimes you need to push them to revoke their GitHub credentials, ban them from Slack, right?
Wow.
But this maybe has happened once or twice in the history of the company, so it's not a typical thing. Yeah.
Well, it's good that you care.
Yeah, it's absolutely great that you care about the people. I heard that at some companies, they force you to take at least 2 weeks vacation. What do you think about that? Like, because they say that you need at least 2 weeks to really rest from the work. I don't know if it's true, if you have a different opinion on that.
I do. I have friends who have this. I think what's difficult about that is if people want to do different things throughout the year and they can't because they don't have a big enough allowance. For me, if it was me, I would say I would only feel comfortable with that if you had a generous enough allowance to do enough things over the year. I'm in full wedding season. I would not have been able to go to all the weddings I went to last year if I had to take 2 weeks off every time I took holiday. Or even if I had to take 2 weeks off for one holiday, I wouldn't have had enough time to go to all of those. So I do see it's this solution problem thing again, right? I see where it's coming from. I think a lot of things are done in good faith and are done with good intentions, but there may be some spin out problems from there. I have to say I haven't given it enough thought to really go into it, but that's my personal reaction. If I was forced to take two weeks, I'd be a bit like, what about everything else?
Yeah, I agree. And we at Fibery, we try to have as fewer policies as possible. We generally trust people to do the right things for them. And in this case, this is no different, I think. Like if someone, for example, is waiting for their documents, fun fact, 90% of our team live in a country they weren't born in. So we're a company of immigrants, which means there is a lot of bureaucracy around documents. And there are some periods where people are locked in their country for like 3-4 months while they are waiting for their new documents. And it's fine for them to work all this time. And then once they are free to travel, they can now use more vacation time. I think that's fine. So it's up to every person how they spend their vacation time and whether they would like to accumulate it.
That's fair. Guys, I was just listening to you talking about trust, about cultural fit, and all these factors. And I just wonder how that holds up when you scale. If the company is growing and suddenly instead of 20 people, there's 100 people, can that hold up? Because it's quite difficult to create the trust with more people and to make sure that everyone you hire is like the right fit.
Okay, so in our
Do you have
case...
experience with this? Yes.
Yeah, so in our case, at Fibery, we don't have such experience because we are only 29 people. We scaled from 6 to 29 and most of it happened in remote times. But at this point, there are only 2 people who are making hiring decisions, like myself and our CEO, Michael. So at this point, I don't think that we have scaled enough to face this problem. So we are lucky that we can still check for culture fit firsthand. But yeah, I think that we have all mentioned that right now, just the autonomy part of our culture takes more importance. So we check for this more because in remote times, there is more pressure on you figuring out stuff yourself, how to create your environment, how to pick your schedule, how to reach out for help, how to ask questions, and so on. So autonomy is what we look for more closely now, I would say, now that we are a fully remote company.
Mm-hmm. I don't know, Caitlin, if you had like this experience with companies.
Yeah, so I've been at a company that scaled really, really rapidly. This was pre-pandemic, so it was not fully remote. But one of the things that I think is very key is shock, culture, values, norms. And the reason is because if you can make those clear when people come in and you can just have this clarity over who you are and how you work, then that is it's a non-negotiable from the beginning. This is when I think microcultures become really, really important. And it's, the whole thing, don't love to talk about him, but Jeff Bezos and the like sharing a pizza thing. I think it's important to this is how the company works, but this is how we do it within our team. And I think this is when it becomes very important to have people whose jobs are a little bit more about keeping the ship sailing in the right direction. Maybe not pure management roles still, but especially when it's remote and there's other things to be done. But there are people who make sure that people can do things in the right way. That being said, like for Anton's example, right, you've made it really clear. There's such clarity over, you've said about autonomy and ways of working, that's really clear for you. So maybe that's not relevant for your team because maybe that autonomy piece is so strong and so clear that just scales really clearly and really easily. So it depends on each company. I know, again, a boring answer, but what that does come back to again is just clarity and transparency on ways of working. It's not easy. It's not easy. There is no easy answer. I think you could do an entire podcast series on scaling remote teams.
Completely.
I agree. And one thing that is always useful is having an example, not just within the company, but even within the small team that you're working in. And this sets expectations for a new hire, right? You look around and you see how people work, how they interact, and okay, so because obviously the culture is not what you state, is how things actually happen in the last like 90 days. And yeah, this is especially true, I think, for remote work.
Another thing I think is important, because I completely agree with that, and we haven't really touched on at all, is in-person stuff and having that every now and then. I don't think this is quite as relevant for very new startups where it is literally like every penny is going into the product. I think that's just the way it needs to be. In slightly more established companies where the reason you are remote is for maybe cost saving, because I work with loads of companies that have this, I think it's important to reinvest some of the money that you save through remote working into bringing people together in some sort of collaborative way every now and then. That is a really, really good reinvestment. And whether that's one company I work with do a big team retreat every year that's very strategic and there's fun stuff, but they get a lot of collaborative work done in that time. They were asking how we were chatting about how to kind of keep that going throughout the year, but going back to what Anton was saying about autonomy, what I kind of advised them on and where we've ended up is they now have like a social budget that anyone can apply to. You just put a form in saying, this is what I would like to do, this is how much it will cost per head. And the only kind of catch is they have to open it up to the entire company so anyone can say, oh, I'd like to be a part of that. And that way it's not the company saying everyone has to be in this country on this day or whatever, but people are saying, two of us have said we'd like to be in this city at this time. If anyone else would like to join, this is how much it's going to cost per person, and finance can say, yeah, we can approve that. So there's lots of different ways you can do it, but I think that's a really important aspect. A lot of people do try to save money through remote work, which is obviously really important for both sides, employer and employee. Sometimes you do need to reinvest that money.
That's actually an amazing idea.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think you guys at Localazy just had a team retreat, right?
Yeah.
We do the same. Ours. Yeah, we do team retreats like at least once a year, but it happens that we meet even twice a year. And it's really important because it sets the tone for the following months, and it really improves the connection, the personal connections. And I think it really solves some of the issues of the remote work for us, because we get together, we get clarity on things, and then when we come back home, we are more motivated and we know what the goals are and where are we going, which actually helps to work better later.
Yeah, I would say that's like essential for us to just clarify things on the vision. Like you get clarity, sometimes you get muddled on all the tasks and work and different objectives, and just having at least one of these retreats every year helps you with the vision for the company for at least the next year or the next 5 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
To just add something there as well that I think actually isn't spoken about enough when it comes to remote work. I really don't believe in work-life balance at all, especially for remote teams, but in general, everything is just, unless you're, a teacher, a doctor, even then, it's so blurred. But I think we, as humans, fundamentally need, things like oxytocin, dopamine, things like that. And oxytocin, the main way we get it is through in-person interaction. And I think one of the things we don't talk about enough is that, okay, yes, you might work remotely, but we then don't know what people's outside of work lives are like. Maybe they're quite isolated, maybe they're quite introverted, and they're not getting that social interaction outside of work. And I do think that companies do have a duty of care to people. And I think that having those in-person things, however kind of sporadically they are, even if someone doesn't necessarily want them, as humans we do need a certain level. So I think that's a really helpful way of making sure that you are doing that kind of human biological level stuff as well as the strategic things. It's so important and we just don't really think about it that much. But yeah, because the lines are so blurred, it's like, where do you stop? I think that's where well-being and personal development comes into it. Like when you've got the money, of course, again, early stage startups don't necessarily have this, but when you're able to say, maybe you've got a well-being budget that people can deploy however they like. And for some people that might be to do more social things outside of their remote working. For others, it might be for learning, whatever. But again, it goes back to that autonomy and people understanding what they need. But I think that really needs to be paid attention to as well.
Yeah, I agree.
Absolutely.
And we had a all hands company retreat a couple years ago on Cyprus. It was beautiful, and it was 50% strategy, and this was the time that we actually picked the course for the company for the next a year and a half. It turned out an incorrect course, I would say, as well. It happens. Yes. It was a small pivot that did not work, so we get back to our old tracks. But at the same time, 50% of it was building personal connections, just talking with people outside work, learning more about them. And we had activities that people organized for each other. So there was no organized, paid for, I don't know, juggler or stand-up comedian. No. I prepared some games for the team. Our colleagues did some activities, so it was crowdsourced more or less, and I think this is the way to connect better. Most of these activities were deeply social and creative, so it was cool. Last year we did what Caitlin mentioned. We put every penny into the product growth, so we skipped it, and now in 2 weeks we'll have our new set of retreats, this time in 2 locations, one on Cyprus, one in Poland. This is because of the problem I mentioned before. Some people cannot travel outside of Poland, some people cannot travel outside of Cyprus, so they will have their own dedicated retreats, and hopefully this autumn we will all meet again as well. But this happens once a year, twice a year. We also gradually found out that, okay, it's great to have some hubs that people can meet at. So right now we have maybe 15 people in Warsaw, and we rent 6 desks at a co-working space, and it has been awesome. There were spontaneous features developed, conceived, and released just because people talked about something on a lunch. They had an idea and immediately came to their desks and design programmed something. Lots of knowledge sharing happening informally, but also just gossip that is sometimes helpful just to spread information within an organization, and people can ask questions that they are shy to ask in front of everyone, like how realistically are we close to closing this enterprise deal, or do you think is it the sustainable growth that we are right now in? Questions like that. And we have a hub in Warsaw. We have now one in Limassol and one in Nicosia, where our headquarters, formal headquarters, is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, guys, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but we are way past our time.
Okay.
So we
It
have
has been
something
fast.
prepared for you to finish. I don't know, Jan, if you want to do the honors. We have a lightning round of questions to close off this topic. So let's go.
Yeah, just 3 quick questions to close this up, because as you say, we could go forever. It's a really interesting topic, and a lot of subtopics really spread out of this. So just a quick question, and you could answer first, for example, Caitlin, and then you can answer Anton. What's the one piece of advice you wished you heard earlier when starting with remote work?
This applies to all work, but particularly to remote work, that rest and recovery are not nice to have, they are non-negotiable for high performance.
Anton?
I wish I discovered blocking time for deep work earlier.
Love that, yeah.
Yeah,
Awesome.
permanent scheduled hours that I'm not available for anything but concentrated, focused work.
What's one unpopular opinion you have about remote teams? If you have one.
Yeah, you don't need more tools, you don't need more stuff, you need clarity first, clarity on your structures, your norms, and your culture. Then you can layer those on if you need them.
Not sure how unpopular this opinion is, but I think with remote work, a lot of stuff is on the shoulders of each person. There is less a company can do to ensure a productive environment, let's say, and a productive schedule. So it's up to everyone to figure this for themselves, because the answers are different for each person. Like right now, I'm sitting in a home office that is a must-have for me, but some people organize their physical environment differently, their schedule as well, and there is not much a company can do. We can suggest something, set some expectations, but it's up to every person to figure out what works for them.
I see, yeah. So the last question, something that works in office but breaks remotely.
Yeah, this goes back to the very first thing we talked about. So it's this casual observation-based management works really well in an office, just keeping an eye on someone. It's a lot harder in remote environments. There needs to be a little bit more structure, explicitness in feedback, expectations, recognition, things like that. Like you said, Anton, is paying attention to those Slack channels and seeing how people are responding, but not everyone does that, and that is really necessary.
Yeah, so informal communication flows would be my answer. Not those maybe that are connected to features in development or marketing campaigns in development, but something that doesn't neatly falls into some work breakdown.
Like the chit chat and things that like happen naturally, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much, guys. It was great having you. Really interesting conversation. And one last thing, I would just to remind our listeners where people can find you. What are some social media or if you have a website or something, Caitlin?
Yeah, I'm very active on LinkedIn, Caitlin Rozario. There's, I think, 3 of us in the world, so I'm quite easy to find. And I talk a lot about sustainable productivity for both individuals and teams, and I'm always available for in-person and remote workshops.
Already
so
connected,
Anton?
yeah. I've sent you a note. Okay, so go to fibery.io and try Fibery as your primary remote collaboration tool as well. And you can find myself on LinkedIn or on X. It's everywhere, Anton Iokov. And I guess there are not many in this world, so you will not miss me. I know maybe another guy, but he's not active on any of these platforms. Yeah.
We have some unique guests today here, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, guys, thank you so much for joining us. And for the audience, please check the description box because we're going to leave every reference that Caitlin and Anton mentioned. And thank you so much. See you on the next episode of Bridging the Gap. Bye.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you
Bye.
so much. Bye-bye.
If you like this episode, please follow our channel and add it to your favorites so you don't miss the next conversation. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and YouTube for updates and bonus content. Until next time, stay curious!